my sister's attempt to outdo my garden revealed our backyard has archaeological significance, leading to a global discovery of an ancient civilization, with secrets carved into the walls. My sister, Olivia, has always been competitive, but it usually manifests in things like board games or who can finish their dinner the fastest. However, when I started cultivating a decent garden in our backyard, that's when her competitive nature took a truly bizarre turn. I'd spent the last couple of years carefully amending the soil, learning about companion planting, and slowly but surely, my garden had become something of a local marvel. I even managed to grow some prize-winning tomatoes. It was my haven, my pride, and my joy. Olivia, who had previously expressed zero interest in horticulture, suddenly decided she was going to have an even better one. She started ordering truckloads of exotic soil, strange fertilizers, and what seemed like every plant in the catalog. My garden was a quaint cottage garden. Olivia's was threatening to become a botanical theme park. She was getting really intense, digging deeper and more aggressively than I ever had. I chalked it up to her usual outdo everything, and honestly, was amused, until one afternoon when she screamed. She had been digging a new bed near the old shed when her shovel hit something hard. At first, I thought it was a rock, but when I ran over to see what she was screaming about, it turned out she had unearthed a small section of wall made of intricately carved stone, not something you'd typically find in a suburban backyard. We spent the rest of that day carefully excavating that area, and it turned out we had unearthed not just a wall, but a section of what appeared to be an old building. Initial theories were a forgotten well or a small stone structure from an old settlement, but we didn't know how old it could be, which got both my attention and, most importantly, hers. Olivia has always been competitive, and this whole thing started because of my garden. Now I was competing with an archaeological mystery I hadn't even found. Update 1: The discovery led to a full-blown archaeological dig in our backyard. We contacted the local historical society, and they brought in a team of experts who spent several days carefully excavating the area around the stones Olivia had uncovered. They found more and more evidence of the old building, including pottery shards and tools, which suggested that the structure was not a well or a settlement, but something else completely. Then the carbon dating came back. Turns out it wasn't from the 1800s or the 1700s, but rather from the 1400s, a full 100 years older than we could have imagined. After that news, Olivia and I were fighting for the discovery, constantly trying to have better finds than each other, even though technically we had found all of this together. We were also fighting about space, because the dig was getting too close to my prize-winning tomato plants. Olivia was also being dramatic for some reason. Every new discovery was followed by her asking a million questions as to why that specific thing was there or what it could be, all while trying to have a new thing to explore to outdo the last one. For some context, our house is only a half a century old, and it didn't make any sense for it to be from 600 years prior. What we thought was our backyard was actually the site of something far more significant. We were told to be careful not to move certain pieces as they might be very sensitive to light. Olivia, of course, went around and moved them anyway. Update 2: The archaeologists began their systematic excavation. What was previously a small dig site turned into a full-blown exploration of history. We were told that the original building appears to be an old trading post. Pottery shards, old coins, a few tools, a variety of different seeds, all from different places in Europe. We had a full historical site in our backyard, but they found something even more interesting. The head archaeologist, Timothy, pulled me aside one morning while Olivia was at work and showed me a hidden chamber under where the main building was, and found intricate carvings of creatures that looked like nothing I had ever seen before, including tools, clothes, and food that made it look like the place was used as shelter after the trade post. From the artifacts that were found, it looked like it could be from an even older civilization, something far older than Europe, and that was when everything went bonkers. Olivia started claiming this was all hers, that my garden was stupid, and she knew we had some hidden history beneath the soil. It was incredibly annoying as it had not been for the old trading post from Europe, the one she had found. To begin with, we would have never discovered this cave. There is a lot we don't know, but this will be explored once the other site is properly documented. I told the archaeologist that I didn't care who claimed it, because history was important, and he agreed. My sister, on the other hand, has been very intense and has had multiple blow-ups, accusing me of trying to steal her thunder. All this historical discoveries have gone over her head, because all she sees is how her discovery turned out to be more significant than mine. Update 3: The media has gotten hold of this discovery, and our house was becoming quite popular for a few days. However, after Olivia threw a fit during her first TV interview where she threw me under the bus, the team decided not to work with the media when it came to us, the house owners, due to our complicated relationship. My name and my sister's name were both everywhere and all over the town, including all kinds of ridiculous assumptions on who found the site. What's really annoying is that Olivia, while in person would never agree with or acknowledge my side in all of this, publicly takes credit for everything that was found. I guess I could expect it. My sister is so competitive that she refuses to take a loss, but now it's just ridiculous. She said, "They found it because of me. If it wasn't for me, it would still be sleeping under the ground." After the archaeologists talked to the press about it, it has turned out that it's not from an old European civilization or any other places we are aware of, but from a civilization that has never been discovered before. This old city was used as a trade post, which made it a very significant find. This old hidden location could lead to an understanding of how they lived and what it might lead for our own culture. And with that, the world was watching. The whole ordeal took a major turn from who can outgrow a garden to who can outdo who when it comes to history. Update 4: after our site has gone global, other archaeologists who wanted to study that civilization came over from all over the world. Olivia wanted to show off to all the guests, telling them about how important and special she was. What was worse, though, is she tried to say that she was the one who convinced the archaeologist that this was not something from Europe. She has really lost it. However, while going down the old cave one time with one of the new archaeologists, a young woman from Egypt named Zoe, she touched a specific part of the wall, and this secret hidden door opened up to another room that had not been discovered until that point. It was full of pottery, tools, fabrics, jewelry, even an old journal that seemed to detail how and why the civilization had disappeared. In there, they also found an old compass that I couldn't quite make sense of, but had carvings of several stars. That's when Zoe had a brain blast. She grabbed the old compass and compared it to the star constellations they had found carved in the cave, and it was then that we discovered the true use of the hidden room. As it turns out, this wasn't used as a shelter, but a celestial map. All these carvings on the walls weren't random drawings, but maps of the stars which helped to chart where the civilization would have needed to go for different trading routes. The journal was actually a log of this old civilization on how they traded and who they traded with. This civilization had trading routes all over the world, thousands of years ago, all of them recorded on the map. The room was a sort of star mapping trading room, and it was the only one of its kind in the entire world. Update 5: Olivia's reaction to the hidden star mapping room was something else as well. She wasn't jumping or excited. No. She kept insisting that she found it, and that if I wasn't trying to take her spotlight, it would have never been found. I was so sick of her and her constant need to always win or outdo me. So to test her, I asked her to read some of the constellations, to describe their names and some of the routes this civilization would have taken. She was unable to, and simply repeated the information Zoe had presented with her. As a final insult, she then suggested to have all the finds, including the journal and the map, removed and to be put in a glass box at her house to be the centerpiece of her home. The archaeologists finally had enough of her constant grandstanding and decided they wanted her out of the house, just as much as I did. Even Timothy, who had been trying so hard to stay unbiased, said he was done. But since Olivia has as much of a right to the site as I do, he couldn't simply ask her to leave. So the Historical Society reached out to us, requesting that we make a decision to either have everything go to a museum or to be owned by one or both of us. Olivia immediately said yes, but refused to share any of the stuff she would get from the deal. Which is, honestly, something that I should have seen coming. The only thing I can truly take away from all of this is that I finally stopped competing with my sister, and all the attention-seeking behavior she's been having because she found herself in the shadow of something so truly historical. Instead, I decided to sign a deal with the Historical Society to make my backyard, and this new civilization they were able to uncover to the public, while also donating most of it to the museum. So, at least something positive came out of all this drama. I let my sister plan my wedding after she ruined the first one. Turns out she's planning my dream ceremony as an apology. My first wedding was a complete disaster thanks to my sister, Allison. I had always imagined a small, intimate ceremony with close friends and family, something that felt personal and reflected my love for nature. What I got instead was a garish, over-the-top spectacle orchestrated by Allison, complete with a Vegas-style Elvis impersonator and an ice sculpture of a swan. The entire thing felt so fake and performative, which was the last thing I ever wanted for my big day. I was mortified and absolutely miserable, and frankly, the whole experience soured me on the idea of weddings in general. My then fiancé, Milo, was also less than thrilled. We ended up calling the whole thing off and parting ways. It took a long time, but eventually I moved past the fiasco. A few years later, I found myself falling head over heels for Andy, a kind, down-to-earth guy who makes me laugh like no one else can. We were getting serious pretty quickly, and he mentioned wanting to get married one day. I felt a familiar knot in my stomach, but I knew I wanted to spend the rest of my life with him, even if it meant going through a wedding again. I wasn't ready to trust my own judgment, so I made a decision that I figured would be fun and beneficial. I asked Allison to plan it. I figured if I let her go completely unchecked, I'd get another Vegas impersonator experience, which I now knew would kill the possibility of a second wedding. My family thought I had lost my mind. My friends thought I had gone completely crazy. Even Andy raised his eyebrows when I told him about my plans. I was so overthinking about weddings, I wanted this over and done with. Allison immediately dove into planning, becoming a whirlwind of Pinterest boards and vendor calls. I admit that I was a little nervous at the beginning, thinking that this was going to become another disaster. It was very hands-off from me. I didn't want to know a single detail about the wedding she was planning. We got into a fight once when she asked me if I wanted a large or small dress, and I ended up screaming at her saying, "Whatever one that makes you happy." Ever since then, she just stopped asking me questions or for input. A few weeks before the wedding, a package showed up at my door with a beautiful handmade journal and a heartfelt letter. The journal had a pressed flower on the cover, and the first page had a photo of me from a field of wildflowers when I was little. Allison wrote about how sorry she was for how she ruined my first wedding, and how she had always wanted to show me she loved me, and that she had been listening to me, even when I didn't think she was. She expressed how much she wanted to make amends and make this a special day for Andy and me, because we deserved happiness and a beautiful wedding. She mentioned that she had done a lot of research into my idea of a perfect day, including all the conversations we had when we were young, when I would talk about my dream wedding as a small child. The letter concluded with her asking me to meet her at a park a few days before my wedding, but not to tell my fiancé. She left some photos too. When I went to the park, I was greeted by the most beautiful scene. There were fairy lights strung throughout the trees, a long wooden table set for a meal, and an abundance of wildflowers everywhere. There was a small wooden bridge that led to a little creek where I could hear the sound of running water. I almost started crying, and I hadn't even met up with her yet. Allison was standing there, waiting for me, and I asked her if she planned this all by herself. She said, "I did. This is how you always wanted your wedding to be," she said. She asked if I liked the flowers, and said that she specifically ordered those because of my love for wildflowers from our childhood. She said that she had never felt like I was comfortable sharing with her what you had in mind, and was always putting down my thoughts and ideas. But after I asked her to plan my second wedding, she took all those years of pent-up knowledge and applied them. This is what the wedding will look like. She said that she spent the last couple of years going to the local parks and trying to see which one would suit the most, and then she built the whole thing in her backyard. The whole thing was breathtakingly beautiful. It was everything I had ever dreamed of. She had a beautiful gown that mirrored my love of nature as well. The whole thing had a very boho chic vibe, with simple flower arrangements and warm lighting. It was absolutely gorgeous, nothing at all like the Vegas spectacle she had previously organized. She walked me through the details she had planned for my wedding with Andy, which were all amazing. The only big differences were that it would be in a huge field of beautiful flowers with mountains in the backdrop, and that we would actually use a regular venue as backup in case of rain. Allison had planned the wedding of my dreams, making this an apology that had me on the verge of tears. On the day of the wedding, everything went off without a hitch. I walked down the aisle that had real flowers, not fake flowers, that were also locally sourced, and we were married under a beautiful archway made of willow branches. Even the reception had a warm, rustic feel, with fairy lights and wildflowers everywhere. The best part of it all was that my family and friends told me how incredibly beautiful and how very me the whole thing was. My heart was full, and I knew then that I had been given the apology I always secretly yearned for. Turns out that a little bit of trust in your family is worth the risk, after all. I truly got a dream wedding, thanks to my sister who had previously destroyed one. My mom's life-long rival turned out to be her long-lost sister, and they're now co-writing an emotional roller coaster of a memoir with a guaranteed plot twist. My mom, Patricia and her neighbor, Elena, have been rivals for as long as I can remember. It started small, like whose lawn was greener or whose holiday decorations were more elaborate, but escalated to ridiculous levels of pettiness. They'd snipe at each other over the HOA board, publicly critique each other's recipes at neighborhood potlucks, and generally make life in our cul-de-sac feel like a reality TV show. I always felt caught in the middle, trying to maintain a polite facade while secretly dreading any interaction between the two of them. It wasn't just me either. My younger brother, Liam, and I often joked about how Mom and Elena should just start boxing already. Mom always said Elena was jealous of her for having a loving family, a beautiful home, and for being a great baker. Elena's side, as I gathered from random bits of conversation, always said Mom was a busybody with no real hobbies outside of making other women miserable. The truth was, both were successful in their own rights. Mom was an amazing cook, worked in finance, and ran an animal shelter for fun. Elena owned a very successful landscaping business and was always a super knowledgeable about plants. All of this made the fight even more ridiculous. Then a few months ago, everything changed. My grandmother on my mother's side, Gran, passed away, and I was tasked with going through her belongings. While sorting through old photographs, I stumbled upon a faded letter addressed to Elena Me dated 1965, tucked inside a box of her old recipe cards. The handwriting was Gran's, but the name was not my mom's. I felt my chest tighten up. My mom never mentioned an Elena. She was an only child. On a whim, I showed my mom, and she instantly went pale like she'd seen a ghost. She grabbed the letter, read it, and then just stared at it, a mix of confusion and shock crossing her face. She said nothing for a while, and just held on to it for the rest of the evening. The next day, Mom asked me if I wanted to go with her for her walk. During our walk, she explained to me that when she was a child, she had an older sister that her mom gave up for adoption. It was kept a secret in her side of the family. She had no idea what her name was or if she was still alive. And suddenly, it dawned on both of us at the same time. My mom said she needed to show this to Elena. As soon as Mom showed Elena the letter, the color drained out of her face as well. They just sat there for a moment before Elena spoke. She explained that she knew why she was given up for adoption, but never had the chance to talk about it. It seemed Gran had been a young, unwed mother. Elena said she felt like she'd been robbed of knowing her biological mother. Everything clicked into place. All the fighting. All the weird similarities. All of this time, they had been rivals who were sisters. As if out of a movie, they broke down together and cried. It took a few hours for them to start processing everything. They spent the night at our house, going through all the old family photos. The next day, instead of bickering over whose recycling bin had overflowed, they sat at my kitchen table, a mountain of old photographs and documents between them, sharing stories of their lives with a mix of laughter and tears. It turned out that they had so much in common outside of all their weird feuds. They both had a love for classic movies, enjoyed the same kind of historical fiction, and even had a similar love for cats. Now, here's the even stranger part. Over the next few weeks, Mom and Elena started spending more and more time together. They started to visit local historical sites, had a weekly girls' night with my grandma's friends, and even started learning different crafts together. They finally put their differences aside, and instead were collaborating on things. It also turns out, they both had the desire to write a book, and what was once my mom's rivalry is now turning into a book deal. As they both work, they write part-time, and they have decided to publish a joint memoir about their lives and how they reunited. This has been a complete whirlwind, and the petty war between them is now something else entirely. It still doesn't feel real. I know one thing, my grandmother was looking down at this with a smile, because she could never have dreamed of such a reunion. My mother replaced me with a look-alike at my own wedding, because I wasn't pretty enough. Now she's demanding grandma's inheritance. My wedding day should have been the happiest day of my life, but instead, it became a bizarre theater production where I was the understudy replaced without notice. I always knew my mother, let's call her Elena, was obsessed with appearances, but I never imagined she'd take it this far. Growing up, my appearance was constantly scrutinized. Every outfit, every hairstyle, every pound I gained or lost was a topic of discussion. I tried to ignore her obsession, focusing on my studies, building a life that wasn't defined by her standards. When I got engaged to Mark, a kind and supportive man, I hoped this would finally be a day for me. I spent months planning a day that was supposed to reflect our love for each other. I even went dress shopping alone and found the perfect simple gown. It was everything I could have ever dreamed of, but alas, the dream would soon be shattered. The morning of the wedding was chaotic but normal. My bridesmaids were getting ready. The hair and makeup artists were bustling around, and my mom was strangely quiet. I was a bit puzzled since she would usually be in my ear about how I should be acting, but I thought maybe she was actually letting me enjoy my day for once. When it was time to put my dress on, that's when things got incredibly weird. I couldn't find my dress. Panic started to set in, but my mom, looking strangely calm, said that it was fine, that we could always use one from her closet, as it would make her very happy if I wore hers. I refused, because I had specifically asked her not to pick one out. That's when she took my hand and guided me to a room, and when I entered, there she was. There was a woman that looked so much like me, and she was in my dress. She also had my hair color, was wearing similar makeup, and looked so unbelievably beautiful. I couldn't believe it. She said I'd be wearing a dress my grandmother chose for Alina, that would be more appropriate. It was only when she was walking down the aisle that I noticed her gait and mannerisms were exactly like mine. I could see Mark looking confused, as his best man was nudging him with his elbow. I was replaced at my own wedding. Alina had literally found a woman who looked just like me and put her in my wedding dress and walked her down the aisle. I found this all completely bizarre. The wedding continued with this imposter walking around in my dress, giving a speech I didn't write, dancing with my husband, and all these other things that she shouldn't have been doing. I hid in a back room, completely devastated and fuming, until it was time to leave. I said nothing to my mother, only made eye contact once as I left. I went home and cried. When Mark arrived, I had calmed down a bit and told him everything. Mark was equally angry and shocked. We ended up eloping to the courthouse 2 days later. Now comes the real kicker. After the wedding, Alina called me a couple of days ago. She said that grandma's will specifically left her an inheritance, but that my wedding needed to be picture perfect so that she and I could be a legacy for this family. She thinks she is justified because she did me a favor by having me walk down the aisle and is demanding my grandmother's inheritance on my behalf. I hung up and have since blocked her on every platform. It feels like a bad dream, and I am still trying to understand what exactly happened that day. Update 1. After I posted about what happened with my mother, I got a call from Mia. I wasn't expecting it. She said she always knew that my mom was weird and possessive, but never thought she would go as far as replacing me with some look-alike stranger at my own wedding. Mia was also upset, and said her mother had even tried to replace her at her own birthday and wedding with a younger, prettier version. Mia had to deal with my mother for more than 30 years, and she thinks she may have had something similar happen to her too growing up. It was very bizarre to say the least. Mia also told me that that woman was actually a makeup artist her mother knew, and that she found her online after showing her my wedding photos. Apparently, my mother had been obsessing over my imperfections for years, and she needed the perfect bride. My mom had shown my photos to various makeup artists, saying she wanted me to look like that every day. It turns out that the makeup artist was in her wedding as well, and she said that it was all a lie. They had made up a story about it being for her own wedding. Mia also confirmed she had never been romantic with Ben. Mia just thinks she is her mother's scapegoat. She says if my mom knew she was talking to me, she would disown her as well. I feel so sorry for Mia. To help alleviate some of my issues, Mia recommended me to a lawyer who she personally worked with when she was trying to leave her toxic home. Apparently, he was used to dealing with moms like my own. I met with him today. He was also shocked, and he thinks a civil case would make my mom rethink her life. However, he did warn me about trying to reason with her. According to the lawyer, she has a condition where she believes herself to be a victim of the world, and it would take serious interventions to realize how wrong her actions have been. After talking about everything that happened, I decided to send a message to my mom. It basically said, "I've always wanted to impress you, and I wanted you to be proud of me." My wedding was supposed to be that moment. I had always fantasized my grandmother looking at me and telling me how beautiful I am. I wanted to have a beautiful wedding like the other people in the family. However, you destroyed it. Not for you, but for me. The wedding that you planned was a sham. Everything felt so fake, so forced, so artificial. And all of this is coming from someone who was just replaced by somebody else. I hope you're happy now, Mom, because I am officially done. And if you want that inheritance money, you'll need to get a court order to get my approval to use those funds. I'm not sure what I did to her, but whatever it was, I'm done. Update 2. I've decided I'm not going to pursue legal action against my mother regarding the wedding fiasco. My lawyer thinks it's a good thing, that it's best to move on, but he has already filled out paperwork for the inheritance should my mother pursue that, as that was my greatest concern. The truth is that I don't want to waste my time and energy on a court battle. I just want to put this chapter behind me and focus on my life with Mark. We have been discussing going for couples therapy, which I do believe will help us with better communication and boundary setting skills. I am done focusing on the negative because it was exhausting. However, my mom is not done with me. After my conversation with her a couple of weeks ago, things escalated quickly. She went to one of my coworkers and said I was getting my body done and wanted to have an affair with their supervisor, that I was mentally unstable and needed to be fired from my position before I brought down her family. Thankfully, my coworker called to inform me, and I have my human resource department to look over the situation, while I also contacted my lawyer, just in case. After that episode, she has resorted to social media. At first, she was using some anonymous accounts, but thankfully Mark's cousins discovered her and took the screenshots. She is claiming I am a whore, that I'm after my husband's money, I was a bad daughter, etc. The list is long. She even posted the photo of me from my first birthday, which she always used to make fun of to call me ugly. She even created an email with a similar name to mine and is posting very bad and degrading things about me. All of this started right after I sent my mom that message saying I was done. Since then, she has kept at it for about 3 weeks now. After a very long talk with my therapist yesterday, I have learned and accepted that I won't be able to make her understand, nor will I ever get her acceptance or validation. Because whatever I did growing up or however I act, it will never be good enough for her. She has created her own reality and is unable to detach herself from it. And that's very sad, but that is what it is. And the same can be said for my father. So I'm going to stop trying. Instead, I will focus on myself. My journey is to be kind to myself, love myself, and focus on my growth as a person. And no matter what anyone says, I am enough. My rival photographer used my studio, and I discovered we were both drawn to the same historical event. But now, I realize we are long-lost cousins. I've always seen Amelia as my rival, not necessarily my enemy. We both started photography around the same time, both trying to capture the essence of our little town, especially our historical buildings. We'd always bump into each other at local events, each with our lenses trained on the same subjects. So when her studio was unexpectedly flooded and she needed a temporary space, it was surprising I even considered offering her mine. I rationalized it. We'd both benefit. I'd get a bit of rent money and have a quiet space while she was there, and she'd have a place to operate, all without the added drama or seeing me. My studio was large and well-equipped with extra rooms, and I figured our schedules rarely overlapped. I wasn't expecting much more contact other than the occasional text regarding rent. I was so wrong. It wasn't until she accidentally left her notebook behind in my studio that I saw, for the first time, how similar our work had become. It wasn't just the local buildings, it was the specific way we framed them. It was as if we had been documenting not only the same places, but also the same historical event. The notes in her book spoke of an old railroad line that ran near our town that used to ship goods in the early 1900s, and a labor dispute that happened when the town was just getting started. A dispute involving a mysterious fire that destroyed a warehouse that stored goods. I've been documenting this as well, focusing on the crumbling railroad tracks, but always struggling with getting the context correct. Her notebook had photos of the places I had, with notes about the very fire I had been trying to piece together. I thought her focus had been on our town's main attraction, a historic courthouse. Now, I'm questioning everything. I reached out to her through text, trying to be professional, and asked her about the railroad line. She was surprised and said that she was documenting it as well. For context, she has always focused on old homes. What were the chances both of us, from totally separate backgrounds with very different styles of photography, were after the same story? We met for coffee and talked for hours. We pored over photos, compared stories, and even discovered we had interviewed the same very old man, but a few weeks apart. He didn't remember much about it, though. It was the most interesting conversations I had ever had in the longest time. It turned out, we both independently picked this up during a historical preservation presentation in the county building a couple of months back. Something no one took interest to other than the two of us. We discovered the man we were using for our photo shoot was actually a descendant of a worker involved in that fire and labor dispute all those years ago. The whole thing was bizarre. We're now collaborating on a project to present our findings. I thought I knew my rival, but I had no clue we were so similar. Maybe we were destined to collide in more ways than I initially thought. Update when it turns out Amelia and I didn't just have similar photos, we had the same photos. After a deeper dive into our archives and comparing metadata on photos and images, we stumbled upon some images where the angle and composition were exactly the same. down to the specific placement of each leaf on a tree and shadow of a building. We originally thought that maybe someone was stealing our work, but then we saw a text on her phone. I thought this was really funny, because a few weeks prior, I was cleaning up and discovered her phone was dead and brought it into the studio to plug it in. I took an opportunity to add the studio's Wi-Fi to her devices, and to this day, she doesn't know. We did not expect to see some texts with her dad about how our cameras worked, where a lot of the local buildings we photographed had almost the exact same angles, and we had both interviewed the same person but a week apart. After that, she showed me a list on her notepad that has detailed notes on how the shadows would fall during specific times of the year, where to stand to get the most dramatic effect of light, and a timeline of specific days we visited that location. It was identical to mine. We then discussed how we both had recurring dreams with flashes of what we thought were memories of those places, and our bodies felt a strange draw to them, like we just had to be there at specific times to capture the moment. We compared the timelines of events in our dreams, and everything started to line up. The text was from a year ago, long before we offered the studio to her, long before we even started focusing our projects. Everything was too coincidental to be just that. That's when it started to click, and the bizarre situation got even more bizarre. I found some old documents about how two people were separated at birth because one of them was severely injured during that fire. And for the last 7 months or so, I've been feeling strangely drawn to old photos of a person who might have been my grandmother, whose maiden name was a name that matches Amelia's family. When I was just starting photography, I was given an old camera from my mom's attic. It was her father's and was from the 1920s. It has no serial number or other identifying characteristics, but it's a camera I could feel some strange comfort with using. I started comparing that camera with Amelia's camera. It was a bit more modern but still vintage. I saw the same lens, from the same company, and I began to suspect that we were documenting our own family's history. Using our shared grandfather's camera, the implications of this were staggering. We started researching our families and decided to meet with our moms to compare our family history. The information they shared were almost identical. We then did a DNA test, and shockingly, it turns out we are very close relatives. Not necessarily siblings, more like cousins. I'm not sure if we are distant cousins, second cousins, but definitely relatives. Maybe it's too crazy for anyone to believe, but we're documenting a part of our family's history with cameras that belong to them. Update 2: there is a third member to this insane equation. A man, 70s M, named Robert, was at our museum yesterday looking at the old photos in the basement. He was specifically looking at our railroad pictures. We decided to go up to him to ask why, since he was clearly not there for the pottery. And when we asked, he mentioned that his grandmother was working in the warehouse when it caught on fire. He said that she was one of the few that managed to survive. But the more we talked with him, the more it turned out that he was another cousin. He said that he felt drawn to this town, and he moved here after he retired from a teaching job. We were stunned. I've been starting to get used to this situation, but now there are 3 of us who were inexplicably pulled to this place by this strange energy, or whatever you want to call it. We showed Robert all the photos, images, texts, timeline, all the information we have. And he, too, has had dreams, not of the railroad tracks, but rather specific images, which he was also able to find in our archives. We went through the archives yesterday, all night long. All 3 of us looking at all the documents and photos we could find, and trying to find some commonalities. When we started comparing notes, it became even more clear that this railroad, labor dispute, and fire was a family tragedy, and we were subconsciously drawn to document it and bring it to the light. The 3 of us are now collaborating on a single project to present this family history to the public. We still haven't completely figured it out, nor do I think we ever will, but I am ready for the path we have chosen. This strange rivalry with Amelia has now turned into an unbreakable bond of 2 cousins, connected through history. I look forward to working with all my newfound family and letting the world finally see the story of that long-forgotten fire. I caught my husband teaching our dog sign language. Turns out he's secretly training service animals for deaf children, and I am absolutely floored to know what he does for them. I came home early from work last Tuesday, wanting to surprise my husband, Ben. Instead, I was the one who got surprised. I found him in the living room, not watching TV or playing video games like usual, but on the floor, calmly making hand gestures at our golden retriever, Gus. Gus, bless his furry heart, was mirroring the gestures with his paws and head tilts. It looked like some bizarre, silent charades game. I giggled, and Ben jumped, startled, which made Gus bark excitedly and wag his tail like a metronome gone wild. Ben explained he was trying to teach Gus new tricks, but something about it felt off, like a piece of a puzzle was missing. The next day, I woke up early and saw Ben leaving. Usually, he works from home, so seeing him dressed up and headed out the door at 6 a.m. was very suspicious. I did what any rational, slightly paranoid wife would do. I followed him. I watched him get into his truck, drive down to the next town over and walk into this community center. It was called the Listening Pause Center. I felt my blood pressure rise, assuming he had some secret life, but I decided I needed to see what this was all about first. I peered through the window and saw him greeting other people, and then leading Gus, still wearing his training vest, through an obstacle course. I couldn't take it anymore. I opened the door and went inside to find Ben doing a demonstration with Gus. It turns out he wasn't just teaching Gus tricks, he was teaching him sign language, and Gus wasn't the only one. The whole room was filled with dogs, being guided with gestures, not vocal commands, and the people he was working with, they were all deaf or hard of hearing. I was completely stunned. Ben saw me, a mix of panic and relief flashing across his face. He led me to a quiet corner and finally told me everything. For years, he'd been secretly working at home, creating training guides for dogs for deaf children. He'd started it after reading about the different service animals could make to a child's life, and he had always been a dog person. Apparently, he had been running this place, training dogs, creating the lesson plan, and working on ways to improve these services. I was so angry at the fact that he didn't tell me about this. I asked him why and he didn't really have an answer, but I wasn't really buying his reasoning. I demanded to know everything, and he finally caved. I couldn't believe what he was doing, especially as I thought he was a complete couch potato. Update 1. After calming down from my initial shock and anger, I made Ben sit down with me at home and we went over everything. He explained that he didn't want me to think he was some do-gooder because it would make me feel guilty about my own life. As if working hard at my office made me look bad. We both had a laugh about it. Ben began this whole journey 3 years ago and began helping a little girl with her lab that was trained to respond to the family's specific sign language. But her family couldn't afford it, so he would volunteer and help her out. He explained that it was so inspiring that it changed him forever. So during his free time, which he claims he doesn't have, he researches what new methods or techniques exist for his specific work and what improvements he can make to how he runs the center and improves the lives of his clients. He explained that all the dogs had been rescue dogs from shelters and that he taught them the very basics and put them up to adoption. He said that the adoption fees will go directly to the center. I still feel so bad that he didn't tell me, and that I felt so upset about his being secretive. The logical part of my brain understands he was trying to help others and not try to be a show-off or one-upper, and the emotional side of me just wishes he would trust me more. So many people think they're doing things for the greater good without realizing how it affects the people closest to them. We agreed that he will communicate with me more and that he doesn't need to be perfect. He also promised to set up more days so we can just chill and be together since he's been so busy lately. The next day, I had to go with him. I was too curious. To say I was overwhelmed would be an understatement. Those dogs were so sweet and well-behaved. They all have different personalities, but the one that caught my attention the most was a German Shepherd. She was so gentle and calm, always with a soft gaze. We watched her during the obstacle course, and I saw her pick up a toy and hand it to this little boy with glasses. Then I realized that he could feel but could not hear. My heart melted at that moment. All of the trainers were very kind and sweet people who I bonded with very quickly. I even saw this man who was hard of hearing, but has amazing lip-reading skills. He told me my aura was fantastic, and that I seemed good-natured, and it did give me the warm fuzzes. He taught me how to spell some simple words, and I tried to teach him how to play rock, paper, scissors. It was a mess, and we all laughed together. It did make me really appreciate how much effort everyone was putting in, the dogs included. I'm super proud of Ben, and I'm mad that I didn't see this side of him earlier. I'm just super lucky to be with him, even if he can be a little silly sometimes. I volunteered at the center during the entire weekend, and I'm honestly happy I did. It was fun. Update 2. This is a bit more of an update about how I feel after the initial shock wore off. It's been almost 2 weeks since my snooping escapade, and things are finally settling back into a calmer routine, although our weekends are now jam-packed with dog training and lots of sign language learning for me. Ben and I have been attending a weekly class at his center. It's something that we do together, and I'm slowly but surely trying to learn to communicate with not only the dogs, but also the people who come for our services. I'm getting better at spelling my name and a few other simple words, but I'm still slow. Ben is a pro. Honestly, what started out as a way to keep my eye on my husband has turned into an incredibly enriching experience. It's made us closer, too. I'm also going to have a very unique story to tell my friends at my book club. Who knew, right? As for our dogs, Gus is finally at peace with the fact that he's now being taught proper sign language. Even when he doesn't fully understand the requests, he does try his best. It's like he knows that it's important to us and does everything he can to please us. All things considered, it's been pretty fun. The big revelation that really put things into perspective for me was seeing the families interact with their dogs at the center. The dogs aren't just companions, they are extensions of their families. They help these children navigate a world designed for people who can hear. I'm really happy with Ben. He's an amazing, giving human, and I'm glad that he's found a way to be passionate while helping families just like that one. I'm also proud of him for not being embarrassed to tell me about his passions, even if it did take me following him like a true crime fanatic. He told me I didn't deserve to be kept in the dark, and he didn't know why he did it in the first place. I told him we need to trust each other and let each other be who they truly are. Anyway, my weekend will be packed with sign language classes and lots of belly rubs for these sweet animals, so I'm signing out, peace. My daughter's college fund went missing, and it turns out my husband has been secretly paying his ex-wife's mortgage for 20 years. I've always been the planner in our family, the one who makes sure everything is on track. My husband, Mark, has a good heart, but he tends to live in the moment. We have two wonderful kids, a daughter in college and a son in his last year of high school, and over the years, I've diligently saved for their education. I set up separate 529 plans for each of them, and I've made regular contributions, always feeling a sense of pride knowing I'm helping them achieve their dreams. Recently, I decided to check in on our daughter's college fund, just to see how it was growing and if we would need to supplement it. The online account looked strangely low, far lower than it should be, which didn't make sense. I started looking at the transactions, and the last deposit I remember making months ago hadn't posted, nor any since then. My blood ran cold. I checked the statements closely. There were regular withdrawals going back nearly 2 decades, all made at the same place, for the same amount, every month. They were labeled as mortgage payments. I didn't have a mortgage. My heart pounded in my chest. A gnawing fear told me this couldn't be right. This wasn't our mortgage. Our house was paid off years ago. That night, when Mark got home from work, I confronted him. I showed him the statements, my hands shaking as I pointed to the withdrawals. At first, he tried to deny it, claiming it must be a bank error or fraud, but the truth was in the regularity and the timing of the payments. After minutes of me pushing him to tell me the truth, he finally confessed. 20 years ago, when he was still in his early 20s, Mark had been married to another woman before me. They had a child, and he had told me about that already when we started dating. But what he hadn't told me was that the reason he had been paying for his ex-wife's mortgage for all this time, I was speechless. It felt like a knife through my heart. The man I trusted, the man I built a life with, had been secretly funneling money from our daughter's college fund for his ex-wife's mortgage. For 20 years. My whole world tilted sideways. He tried to justify his actions by saying he felt responsible for his ex-wife and their other kids' financial situation. That since he did it, he was responsible to take care of her since she doesn't have much help. He said he didn't know what else to do and felt guilty about the situation. That he felt obligated to secretly support her and his kids. I told him it was my daughter's education he was playing with. Her dream and not her obligation for her own father. I felt betrayed on every level. Betrayed as a wife, betrayed as a mother, and betrayed as a partner. He was quiet and went to sleep. I slept in the living room. The next morning, things were very weird. We barely spoke. But my anger only grew the longer we sat in silence. I moved to the guest room to avoid him. Update 1. I didn't sleep much last night. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd see the faces of my children and how I've potentially hurt their futures with this man. I took a deep breath this morning and decided I needed to see a lawyer. So I did. He confirmed that Mark's actions were indeed highly illegal and unethical. The money from those funds is earmarked for my daughter's education, and that's where it needed to be. He said that we would get the money back, but we don't know how much will have been spent. After this, I went to my daughter's university, and they confirmed how much money is needed to complete her final year. We decided that I would file an application for financial aid for her to make up for what my idiot husband took. Then I came home and told Mark that the only way we could resolve this was that he was no longer going to be sleeping at my house anymore. He can get his stuff now and go. When he tried to explain again, I looked him dead in the eyes and told him, You had 20 years to show your loyalty, and you blew it. He asked for more time to explain, but I told him we'd be meeting in a courtroom soon, if I don't get my money back, which is what my attorney recommended. I also made it clear that the kids know about what happened, and that the house was not a safe space for them right now. My son is taking it hard. I'm so sorry to my kids that their lives have had such dramatic changes because of their idiot dad. I called my parents and siblings for support. My siblings were on my side while my mom said maybe there was a mistake and it was worth it to try to figure things out. Again, I have made it clear I can't and it won't be. It is my goal to get the money back so I can properly secure my children's futures. My son has been in shock, just like me, and still thinks I might be making it all up, just like his father said in a drunken stupor. He also told me he knows I have a temper, and maybe I overreacted. It really broke my heart to hear him say that. I showed him the printout of the transaction with his grandma's name, and he immediately went to his room without saying anything. I will try to talk to him tomorrow. Update 2. I know I said I would focus on my kids, but I had to do a small update as I'm laying here trying to process everything. My ex actually called me from his mother's house. He asked if I had calmed down now, and that he never thought that I would cause this much trouble. He actually said, "I didn't know I married such a bad woman, and she is probably going to be single for the rest of her life because she is so horrible." He also said that I did this to all of us. Our children are angry at him, which he blames me for. But it all started with him betraying me and stealing from our children, and I have now become a bad person when I'm dealing with the fallout of his actions. He actually asked if I could drop by to talk about this. I literally laughed in his face and said, "You didn't contact me for 24 hours, and now you think I have nothing better to do than meet with you." I have another call to go on, a few emails to send, and a few apartments to look at for me and the kids. Because there is not a chance in hell I'm staying in this house with the memories you've soiled. He said he wasn't moving from the house, and I told him he was right, because I would. So that is what I am doing. I'm moving out of my house. I don't think anything can fix the mess he has created. I am truly done with this man. The lawyer called me back, and he said my ex is going to get a restraining order on me. I mean, is he actually serious? I'm sure the judge will have a great laugh reading that, but whatever. I need to finish what I have to do. And if that is a restraining order I have to get rid of, then whatever. I don't care. I just want to move on and have a good life. It also seems my kids are starting to see their dad's true colors. My daughter has stopped texting him at all, and my son is only giving one-word answers when he does get an answer. Update 3. I have a long day ahead of me, but I'm too restless to sleep, so I figured I'd write another update. Everything is in motion right now. My lawyer informed me that because of my ex-husband's repeated attempts to contact me, and also because of the fact that he has completely emptied my daughter's college fund account, it would be extremely unlikely he would get full custody. But I still need to be ready to go to court and defend myself. The move is almost done. It's exhausting, but it's nearly completed. I'm now in a much smaller apartment closer to my work, and thankfully in the same school district as my son, but I'm hoping he moves in with me at the start of summer. I also received my financial paperwork with all the details of all the money he's stolen and all the interest I've lost. He took out roughly around $130,000 over the years, which he's going to have to pay back. But in all honesty, I don't want his money. My therapist has been helping me find coping mechanisms and is helping me release my anger in a safe way. My son has agreed to go with me, and he has a group counseling session at my recommendation. He is starting to talk more about how his dad didn't put in much effort to be a dad and that he has no respect for him for treating me like this. That made me a lot happier. But this whole experience has opened my eyes to the type of man I married. He's always been kind of manipulative, but never in a harmful way. But as I reflect more and more on my life and our marriage, it has made me think that maybe I am better off alone. My daughter told me that he said I was crazy and making it all up to hurt him. I told my daughter he was lying and will always say things to hurt me. But I also told her I will always love her more than anything. This week I was scheduled to have my divorce paperwork served on Mark, but my brother texted me saying my ex was at the hospital. It turns out he was trying to hurt himself and was unsuccessful. My ex-in-laws came to my door later that night with him, begging to stay with me because he had nowhere else to go. I just shut the door on them without saying anything. Maybe I was being harsh, but I'm tired. I just want to be done. This might be my last update because my priority is my children and moving on with life. I think I have to move on alone to heal. I hope we can all find some form of peace soon, but I need my time. I need to go back to the girl I used to be and maybe even be better. Thank you all again. You have been a great comfort during this terrible time. My ex-friend group's attempt to exclude me from the reunion led to me meeting my biological parents, who changed my life forever. My ex-friend group planned a high school reunion without me, and honestly, I wasn't even that mad. I had moved away after graduation and hadn't really kept in touch. I saw them post a bunch of photos on social media from a bar that I used to frequent with them. And yeah, I felt a little stung. But mostly it just confirmed how much I'd outgrown that town and those people. I figured whatever, they're all probably just as immature as they were in high school. My sister, Harlow, however, was very mad on my behalf. She's always been protective of me, and even tried to infiltrate the event by saying she was me to give them all a piece of her mind. I managed to convince her not to, and that it wasn't a big deal. Later that week, Harlow told me about a mutual friend, Adriel, who was at the reunion and also seemed weirded out by how she was excluded too. They had known each other for a long time, as Adriel was our neighbor growing up, and had just returned back to the States after living in Europe since high school. Adriel called me that day and invited me out to coffee. He felt really bad about how they treated me, and to be honest, I was curious about how his time was in Europe. It turns out he had been living in Germany working as a translator. We had a great time talking, but the biggest thing he shared was that my mom actually lived near him. Apparently, the foster home I was placed in was just outside of Berlin. He never knew because he wasn't aware I was adopted. I didn't even know that. I always thought my parents, Giselle and Justin, were my biological parents. When I asked about why I wasn't told, Adriel didn't know either, but he knew a lady who was friends with my mother, Gabriella, and said he would reach out to her about the adoption agency. He wanted to provide more help, and I agreed to have him as a contact as I look into things further. A few weeks later, I was chatting with Adriel online, and he told me about some of the people from my past that were messaging him trying to find me, and then trying to bad-mouth me. They were also sending him some really terrible messages, so he blocked them. He gave me some names so I could also block them. And that was when I finally decided to take the leap and try to connect with my biological parents. I contacted the agency with all the information I was provided by Adriel, and a few weeks later, they said that my mom was receptive to talking with me. My mom, Gabriella, called me, and it was like looking in a mirror. We both had the same hair, same build, and I even had the same freckles as her. She couldn't believe I grew up in the States, but she was a refugee and wanted to give me an opportunity at a better life, so the agency was told to place me in the States. It turns out, my father's name is also Justin. That's my adoptive father's name too. What are the odds? So I was set up to have a Zoom chat with them a few weeks later, and it went well. We spent about 5 hours talking that day, and they didn't pressure me for anything other than my address, which I reluctantly gave. Update 1, my biological parents, Gabriella and Justin, came to visit this past weekend. The initial meeting was a bit awkward, as we only knew a few things about each other, but it actually went really well. They both said that they never intended to stop tracking my growth, and they were upset to learn that the agency had closed down so many years ago and lost contact with my foster parents. They did not like my foster parents, either. I was told by the agency that it would be better if they were never to see me or have any contact at all after all. My biological mom was a refugee. She didn't trust them, but she agreed because of the promise of a better life for me. They brought me a ton of photos from my first year, which I never had, and it made me cry. The woman in the photos wasn't the same as what my adopted parents showed me. They also explained to me why my foster parents, Justin and Giselle, named me Reagan. It turns out that my birth mother gave me the same middle name because she always liked the name Reagan. Giselle also liked the name. It turns out that the adoption agency gave her my mother's first name so that we would share the name, and it would become a symbolic moment. The real reason why they also chose Justin as my father's name was because both fathers were named Justin. I felt so overwhelmed by these details. I felt like they were finally real now. We have already planned another meeting and are trying to make this an annual thing, which I'm pretty excited about. I did reach out to my former friends and told them that they should have been inclusive instead of exuding me. However, they were dismissive, especially about my relationship with Adriel. I ended up blocking all of them after that. My relationship with my sister and my friendship with Adriel have become much stronger because of all of this. My new life, with new parents, has begun, and honestly, I'm not sure what my life would be if that friend group included me in the reunion. Update 2. My biological mom called a few weeks after her first visit and offered to help with my move to San Francisco. I was accepted into a very competitive PhD program, But honestly, I wasn't sure if I could swing the deposit, moving costs, first month's rent, and so on. She insisted, and when she and Justin offered to help, I took them up on their offer. The next thing I knew, they had booked a flight over and spent the weekend with me going through apartments, and they actually gave me the deposit along with the funds for all my moving expenses. When I offered to pay it back, they refused and said that was theirs for letting me grow up far away. They didn't want me to feel alone or struggle on my own, so they were going to do whatever they can for me. Now, it's been about 4 months since I moved, and I feel like for the first time, I'm finally living my best life. I've been so busy with school that I actually didn't find time to think about the friend group from my high school or my adopted parents as much as I used to. I'm no longer hurt that they excluded me from the reunion, as I have all I need: a loving sister, a long-lost friend, and a new set of loving parents who value me for who I am. And they were all given to me because of that terrible high school reunion. I still keep in contact with all of them every now and then, and plan a visit soon. I couldn't be any happier. I really am grateful for it all. It's insane to think about where my life was just a year ago and where I am now. To think how one thing could lead you down a completely different path is wild. It makes me wonder if there are other biological relatives I haven't met yet. And if there are, would I have met them if it wasn't for all of this? I will never truly know. As I am also sure I will never meet up with that group of people again, and honestly, I'm completely okay with that.